Welcome to Personnelity. I'm your host, Lauri Rawlings from Lauri Rawlings and Associates, LLC, and I provide consulting services and trainings designed to help businesses become more profitable through strategic and data-driven diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I'd like to introduce my co-host, Nicolle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicolle Farup. I'm the principal consultant for Good Company HR, and I'm like a VP of HR at large. I provide high-level human resources guidance and support, training. I do investigations, things like that, and really just help companies make sure that they have their HR things in order and the things that they need. So thanks, Lauri.
Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. We're going to be talking today about a report that was recently released by the Institute for Women's Policy Research. It's called A Future Worth Building: What Tradeswomen Say About the Change They Need in the Construction Industry. The report has some revealing insights into the challenges that women face making a career in the trades, and it offers some advice on how to recruit but also retain more women in the trades. The authors of the report worked closely with Oregon Tradeswomen, Inc. in preparing the report, which was based on a survey of more than 2,600 tradeswomen and non-binary tradespeople. So joining us today to discuss the report's findings and some potential solutions are Oregon Tradeswomen's Executive Director, Kelly Kupcak, and Oregon Tradeswomen's Workforce Equity and Technical Assistance Director, Tiffany Thompson. Thank you for being here. I just want to tell our guests a little bit about Kelly and Tiffany. Kelly grew up in Cleveland, where she early on realized the critical importance of speaking out against injustice, and she wrote her first letter to the editor in third grade, which is really impressive because my son's in third grade right now, and I can tell you he is not writing letters to the editor in his free time.
It wasn't a good one, but it was still a letter.
But I love the thought behind it, Kelly, and the passion. After she raised her sons as a single mom and worked as a union heavy equipment operator, she worked as an advocate for women for almost 2 decades, which led her to relocating out here to the Pacific Northwest to become the executive director of Oregon Tradeswomen in 2017. So welcome, Kelly. And Tiffany started her career working with survivors of interpersonal violence, where she also provided training for service providers on how to work with individuals who've experienced trauma. She started working for Oregon Tradeswomen in 2013 and saw the overlap between her previous work and the experiences that tradeswomen have in the field. So since then, she's been working diligently within and outside of construction to bring about culture change to ensure that no one experiences the trauma that can come from harassment, bullying, hazing, and any type of interpersonal violence. She's honored and grateful to be working with trades workers who trust her with their experiences. And she feels hopeful and determined that with the right tools and meaningful partnerships, we will create change together. So it's really an honor to have you here, Tiffany, as well. So I'm wondering, first off, Kelly and Tiffany, can you tell us a little bit about what Oregon Tradeswomen's mission is and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Oregon Tradeswomen was founded in 1989 by a group of tradeswomen who, at that point in history, there were fewer than 1% of women working in the skilled trades in the field with their tools. And the organization evolved from there to become a nonprofit to provide free services, including apprenticeship readiness training, advocacy, public policy, and support and retention services to tradeswomen who, despite our collective efforts, along with a national network of other tradeswomen organizations, both staffed and volunteer-led by tradeswomen themselves, nationally, we still are just a little bit under 4% of women represented with their tools in the field. And here in Oregon, we're at about 8%. So we know that even though we've made some progress, we still have more work to do. And the work that we're doing collectively that Tiffany is leading on behalf of Oregon Tradeswomen through our Rise Up Oregon program is a more intentional piece around retention and what job site culture, how that impacts retention of women and people of color in the trades. And we're really grateful to be working with the community and an industry here in Portland to shift the needle in that space.
That's amazing. And so, for those in the audience who don't really know about the construction trades. What can you tell us about a career in the construction trades that, is something that more women should be aware of, it's actually a career opportunity for them?
Well, if I could start and then turn it over to Tiffany, the piece that we love is we're really proud to work with women and folks that are gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, who come to us as adult job seekers, and the skilled trades, and in particular the union trades, offer such an incredible opportunity for women and their families to have economic security. It's dynamic work, it's exciting work, it's really proud work. You can point to things as you drive along. Everybody knows when someone's in construction because they're like pointing out the window and shouting to their kids or their partners or their family, I built that. I helped build that bridge or that hospital or that school. So it's really proud work. And I myself, when I was a single parent with two very young boys, who came from being a social worker who didn't know how to run one piece of equipment, I went through a pre-apprenticeship program myself and then went into a union registered apprenticeship, and it changed my life. It allowed me to support my family. I think that the heartbreaking part for us is what's on the other side of it. And while there's many good contractors and excellent training in our industry, not every job site wants us there. And as one of our tradeswomen sisters put it, we love an industry that doesn't always love us back. So I don't know if Tiffany, if you want to talk about what it looks like on the other side and how we prepare women to deal with our industry.
Yeah, I think I do want to just highlight a couple of other reasons, though, that I think women should really strongly consider going into the construction industry. And so just from my own experience, my family worked in the trades, not in, commercial construction that we're mostly talking about here. But I was told at a very young age that wasn't an option for me because I was a woman. So I really felt like the only path that I had before me was to go to college. And while I love my experience at college, and I'm certainly not saying that it's, isn't a good option for some folks, I'm still sitting with a significant amount of debt from my time at college and a degree in French that I don't use at all. And I have ended up in a wonderful place, and a place that I'm super proud of, but I think our culture has told us that the only option that we have is to go to college if you want to get ahead. And now we're seeing more and more folks don't actually get ahead, carry that debt for such a long time that they can't even afford to try to buy a home. And I think careers in construction really make a big difference for folks where you will earn just as much, if not more, than you would have earned with a college degree, and you'll start earning that money right out the gate. So I think that's like a really important reason that folks should know. And I think for the other stuff, I know you've got some additional questions for us, Lauri. So I don't want to get into the parts that are hard, because just like any industry, there are parts that are hard of it, but I want to end on that high note. You really do have an option for jobs that you can be proud of, that can be really, really fulfilling, and you don't have to go into debt to get those jobs.
I can't say enough about what a great career path it can be for women. And I think that's why it's important to take a deep dive into this report that the Institute recently released, because, they've spoken to a number of women and non-binary people across the trades about what their real experience is once they get into the industry. And they're finding some troubling things. Like, one of the report's key findings is that lack of respect, discrimination, and harassment are driving way too many women out of the trades, with 44% of the people they surveyed saying they've seriously considered leaving the industry that they've worked so hard to get into, and that's providing a family sustaining career because of those reasons. And I'm just wondering, Tiffany and Kelly, is that finding consistent with what you see through your work with Oregon tradeswomen?
Absolutely. Honestly, I would even say that number might even be a little bit low, because as we talk to trades workers, right, when they're answering questions in that survey, they might be able to name, I'm being discriminated against, there's a lack of respect. Maybe they'll be able to name that there's harassment. But what we know is we've done more and more trainings out in the field and had these conversations with all kinds of diverse trades workers, not just tradeswomen. We can focus on them for this piece because of the study. But a lot of folks don't even necessarily identify the things that are happening to them as like meeting this level. Like a lot of times they're only going to identify the things that are very, very egregious, like where somebody literally says to them, I don't want you on this site because you're a woman. I would suspect that if we were able to really define for folks what discrimination looks like, what microaggressions look like, what a hostile workplace looks like, give them 800 examples, that they would actually rate that at a much higher level. And so it is absolutely consistent, and I think that it's like not high enough. And we really also hear that's a big reason that lots of folks want to leave. And we are focusing on women and folks of color, in this conversation because of what the research report says. And those communities, experience this type of discrimination and behavior at much higher levels. But that being said, the more that I've opened up these conversations to anyone who works in the construction industry, I've had plenty of straight white men coming to me and saying, I'm experiencing behaviors like in the harassment realm that are so serious that I also don't want to stay in this industry. And so I think this is a problem that's impacting everyone.
And I think that exactly what Tiffany said, part of the challenge is that when you're in the industry, you just get so used to this toxic culture that unless, as Tiffany said, if it's very egregious, you don't even identify it as bullying or harassment or hazing, whereas in any other industry, in any other workplace setting, it would be absolutely unacceptable. And so I think that's important for us to remember in this context. The key authors of A Future Worth Building, Ariane Hiswick and Eve Medford, they're researchers who've been doing work in this space for a long time. And they are, diligent in reaching out to those of us who are practitioners and advocates in this space. But I'm with Tiffany. I think the numbers are much higher. And from the folks that we talk to, again, understanding that it's far more prevalent than folks know. And just quickly to the piece around also how this impacts white men, who are the majority of our construction industry, it's a real thing. And all of those behaviors impact job site culture, job site wide, and they impact employers, right? Also from their bottom line. But I think that's one of the differences that we've seen a shift, like from 20 years ago when I was just cutting my teeth as an advocate in this space. We really didn't talk about job site culture as a health and safety issue. We sort of talked about it as like a woman's issue or a person of color's issue, which gave more justification for folks who were really the bad actors to say, well, and that's why we can't have you here because everything's a problem now, where we've shifted the conversation in part to say it is an issue for everyone. It's a health and safety issue. And we can talk about construction values in the conversation of job site culture.
Those are really good points. And I just want to, kind of emphasize something that both Tiffany and Kelly have said, is that a lot of lay people don't even really understand like what qualifies as harassment and discrimination. And there probably is underreporting. And I'm wondering if, Nicolle, you have such extensive experience as an HR professional, if you can kind of maybe educate our audience a little bit more on the types of behaviors that may not trigger people to think of them as harassment or discrimination, but really can be problematic behaviors that you see in workplaces that really need to be addressed and corrected.
Yeah, absolutely, Lauri. It's interesting because if you look at what is the definition of, what is harassment, what is discrimination, and, how does the EEOC define those things? How does bully define those things? And and how does the law kind of look at it, right? So sometimes we think like, oh, it has to rise to this really high, huge level in order to be discrimination or be discrimination or be harassment that's illegal. And that may be true. Like you may be experiencing behaviors that are the foundation of discrimination or harassment. It doesn't make it better. It just means that maybe you're not going to go to court and it's going to be like, hey, I'm being harassed or discriminated against. But definitely over time, that could could build up into a situation that is, that constitutes illegal discrimination or harassment. And conversely, there can be a single event or a single activity that it can also be discrimination or harassment. Like, for instance, so for some of the specific behaviors you were asking about, Lauri, like a single event would be like hanging a noose in a locker. That's something that we've seen, or that rises to the level of illegal harassment or discrimination. But surprisingly, it's pretty common. Those kinds of behaviors happen a lot. And it is people tolerate it. There are some other studies specifically about sexual harassment and specifically about discrimination in the workplace back in 2018 that kind of led off of the 2015 EEOC report that looked at the same things. And what they found is that what people attribute to a toxic workplace, that's what they're more likely to call discrimination harassment is toxicity. It's just toxic. I don't like it. I'm not comfortable. I don't feel good. And it can be then, little behaviors like, giving jobs that, having workers do menial jobs and not giving them the training that they deserve or holding them to a different standard, which this report, that was one of the things that I pulled out that I thought was really interesting, that really resonated with me, is that one of the number one place of inequity that they see is that women feel like they're held to a different standard of work than men. And what does that mean? That means that the expectations of them are much higher than they are of their male counterparts, which is fascinating, I think. But it's those kinds of things, that kind of that kind of unequal treatment, not treating people with the same, sense of fairness in terms of results, outcome, meeting people where they're at. Those things can eventually lead to that, lead to things that are harassment and discrimination. So,
Nicolle, I'm glad that you brought that up, because it is so often that when we are talking with supervisors in the industry and leaders in the industry, they're really talking about it often from a risk mitigation standpoint, right? And talking about only illegal behaviors. And the work that we are trying to do through the Rise Up model and other models of job site culture change specific to construction is to say, they're beyond the illegal pieces, there's unacceptable behaviors, and we need to address those because they can really spread like wildfire if their interventions aren't happening. And part of the work we do is to empower workers and folks at all levels from all spaces within the industry. And the last thing I just wanted to mention about what you brought up from the report from the Institute for Women's Policy Research, A Future Worth Building, the piece around job rotation and the expectations. When tradeswomen and other trades workers don't have a quality on the job training experience and get rotated to learn all aspects of their craft, they are not going to make it. And that's a retention issue. And so we at Oregon Tradeswomen, we talk about, it's not just about getting in, it's about staying in and being successful, right? And that piece is huge. So working with contractors and apprenticeship programs to understand how that needs to be really holistic.
Isn't that kind of one of the things or one of the main points of the report was that it really does start with apprenticeship programs, that the apprenticeship programs have to be that's where we have to focus on making sure that women get equal training, that's where we develop a foundation so that they do stay, because it seems like that's where a lot of the drop off happens. Is that what I was reading correctly?
I was just going to say, I think that brings up a really important point about also why employers should care about this. Why should you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Those are fancy whatever numbers for people who don't own a business. But at the end of the day, you're talking about retaining your workforce. You're talking about all of the time and investment that you have put into getting folks onto your job and making sure that you want to keep them and not waste all of that money that you've spent making sure that they're trained. And we're also talking about an industry, all industries are facing this right now, right, with COVID. But construction has been facing a workforce shortage for a very long time. And we've known it's been coming for a really long time. And if you do not invest in making sure that folks want to work for your company and are going to want to stay working for your company, you're driving folks away. And at the end of the day, you're not going to make any money at all because you can't even afford to go do the job now.
Yeah, those are two really important points that I want to highlight because they come up again and again in the conversations I have with business owners and the conversations I have with tradespeople, which are turnover is expensive. It's really expensive. And at the same time, people are terrified about the workplace or the workforce shortage. We have a lot of baby boomers who are getting ready to retire, and we're not replacing them at the rate we need to replace them at. And so if you're ignoring 70% of the available workplace, or I'm sorry, the available workforce, because they're not white men, they look different from the traditional pool of tradespeople, you're automatically limiting your ability to recruit qualified people.
I agree with all of that. And the only thing that I have to add is that there was another study done, I think, out of MIT looking at the Great Resignation, which we're all familiar with right now. And that's right. The construction industry in particular has been facing shortages since 2017. And with the infrastructure bill passing, it's going to be even harder. And so that's even more of the business case.
Nicolle, you're absolutely right. And I do think in some ways the Great Resignation is sort of a revolution, right? And a wake-up call for all industries, but certainly construction, to say, how can we do better? And what sort of values do we bring to the industry? How do we, in a capitalistic society, continue to make money, but also treat workers as the assets they truly are, right? And so I do want to be really clear that it is all often, sadly and tragically, much more than just not being respected. We have seen and heard and continue to see so much more egregious behavior in the construction industry because of the longstanding history of saying it's just this macho culture. It's the way it is. People need a thicker skin. And we're saying that, no, you don't need a thicker skin. The industry needs a better way in which we operate and do business. And that is changing job site culture so that we not only can attract but retain this broader talent pool that you mentioned, Lauri. And it's better for everybody, right? It's better for everyone.
Right, including the white men who Tiffany pointed out are also complaining about bullying and harassment on the job site. And so, that piece that you mentioned about job site culture change, I want to pick up on that a little bit more. Kelly, you mentioned earlier the Rise Up program that Oregon Tradeswomen is implementing. Can you or Tiffany tell us a little bit more about Rise Up, what Rise Up is? It looks like Tiffany's raring to go. What is it and how does it work? And what kind of solutions does it offer to the problems we're discussing?
I mean, I was raring to go because this is why I'm in this work. I've spent my entire career responding to folks that have dealt with this kind of behavior for so long and trying to figure out what their resources are and trying to help them transition to a new job or trying to get them to a counselor. And quite frankly, I got exhausted. I was tired of just responding to stuff. And so Rise Up is actually a response. It's about saying, how do we not just wait until somebody comes forward with a problem, but how do we create a movement? And you use this in some of the documents with us, Lauri, and I love this word, so I'm going to be using it all the time. But how do we create a movement together where we are saying we're not going to stand for the culture to be this way anymore, and contractors have a role in that, and workers have a role in that, and advocates have a role in that, and we all have a role to play in saying, I want a positive workplace. I want some place that is not toxic. And so that you're not just responding in the moment when inappropriate behaviors are happening, but saying from the get-go, how do I set a tone on my job site, in my apprenticeship program, with my company that says, this is how we treat each other. This is the expectation. How do we actually live up to that phrasing that I hear people use all the time of we're a family environment, right? They mean that to be really positive and we support one another. But right now we're the really tragic family that does terrible things to one another and you don't speak to half of them, right? Let's be the actual happy family and working together and building really cool projects. So, what is, the Rise Up movement? What are we working, how are we getting there? And so Rise Up is really about giving everyone the tools and the knowledge we need to succeed to both envision what we want our work sites to look like and how we get there. And so Rise Up actually does it through a series of 6 steps that we talk about as being a part of our program. And some of these steps, if you see Rise Up on a job site, you may not be aware of all of these steps. But what we know is that every single one of these steps is really critical in order to create the culture change that we're talking about. Because if we're being realistic, culture change is not easy. I cannot come out and do a training with your folks for 1 hour and expect everything to change. We have spent hundreds of years building the culture that we have now. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna dedicate really significant time to moving a heck of a lot faster to build a better culture than that. But we're not gonna do it in an hour. We're not gonna do it in a few months, and we're not gonna do it with a 2-year campaign. We're gonna do it by consistent effort.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tiffany. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think business owners do need to be more realistic about what it really takes to address some of these really deep-seated structural issues. And it's not enough to do a 1-hour check the box kind of training.
Once a year.
Once a year, exactly. I mean, and I think that for so long has been the model. And we can see in the numbers that model doesn't work. I mean, our numbers of women and people of color in this industry have been growing, but they're still not nearly representative of the community as a whole. And so a more holistic approach is necessary.
Well, and Nicolle mentioned earlier, the EEOC harassment report, and it comes out and directly says that. It says all of these things that we were recommending about a 1-hour training, it doesn't work. And now we know it doesn't work. We have studies that show it doesn't work. So we need to have a different approach.
I was just going to say from a human resources standpoint, and because I've been doing investigations for years, absolutely. And the EEOC report was like, for me, and you all know this, but that report was like for me, thank you, because I've been seeing this for years that this doesn't work. Training does not work. Doing the red stop, green stop, you're on a game. Oh, don't touch people. Ha ha ha. Let's talk about the lady with the low cut blouse and laugh about it. It just doesn't work. And those awesome videos that you can find on the internet through pay services for here's your harassment training, and it's like people in a pretend kitchen who are pretending to fight with each other and stuff like that. It's just not. It doesn't work. It doesn't connect with people. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't change behavior because you can't change people. You have to change behavior. Yeah, and that takes time and that takes commitment and it takes business owners who are willing, who realize and understand that you have to do this if you want to move forward, not only in a positive way as a culture and for retention, but financially.
Nicolle, you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the reasons why we really love the Rise Up model and the approach, because training is part of it. But it really is this deeper piece of empowering leadership to speak in a way and change and act in a way to make a difference. And also every person who comes onto the job site being empowered with those tools Tiffany talked about. In our industry, we use sort of, the metaphor of your tool belt. If you don't have the right tools, you're not going to do the job right. We want to make sure that folks have those tools in that moment to we don't use the term address bad behavior. We talk about disrupting. It's disrupting the traditional behaviors that have created the toxic environment. And I think part of this work too is we talk about the different pieces that resonate with different folks, like public owners or owners of company. Of course, they care about their bottom line. But we also talk about the other aspects that this impacts, right? And they're all connected. Like Tiffany said earlier in this conversation, if you're losing good, skilled, qualified workers because of job site culture issues that are health and safety issues, you can't do your job. your company won't run. And training in the skill piece is already expensive enough. And let's just face it, the construction industry is hard enough. It's mentally demanding, it's physically challenging, it's dirty, it's hot, it's cold, it's rainy. It's tough, right? So why make it harder by allowing toxic behavior on your job site? Like, we don't allow it in any other space. Like, let's get construction caught up, right, into the 21st century.
Yeah, and you make a great point about safety, Kelly. About how behavior that is distracting people from their work can create a safety issue. And I'm wondering if Tiffany or Kelly, you can expand upon that. Like, why is it a safety issue, and what can we do to eliminate those safety problems from the job site?
Yeah, it's absolutely a safety issue. I love talking about it in that context because we talk about safety already all the time in construction. And the other reason I think it's really important to reflect on this, from the safety perspective is also to encourage folks. Like I already said, culture change is hard, but we have also already seen it happen in construction. I don't know if you all know this, but in the 80s, when estimators were putting together project estimates, they would build in for every $1 million on a project, they would estimate that one person would die on that project and just accepted that as fact. And there's been a significant effort to push through that because construction decided that's not okay. We don't want to be harming people in this way. And so now there are safety programs and the culture is completely shifted. And so we can do that with this too. You have to invest resources, you have to invest people. So to answer your question about, how is this a safety issue? I would actually love to just share like a couple of stories about it being a safety issue. And we'll kind of start from that first one. So we talked earlier about that there might be more minor incidents that lead to somebody, not wanting to be on the job, but maybe don't rise to a legal level. When we're talking about culture change, and I want to highlight, that when we talk about Rise Up, we talk about doing this in partnership because we cannot give you something out of the box that's going to work for your company. We have to do this in partnership. That also means that anybody that we're going to be partners with needs to be invested at the level that they are partners, right? To get to where we need to go. So if we're talking about changing the culture, so somebody actually wants to stay, I, have had many trades workers share stories with me, and I'm so grateful for that. But if you take even just the small microaggressions, and what I mean when I say microaggressions are small moments in time where somebody through their words or their behaviors or their action indicates to someone else, you don't belong here. We do not want you here. And those actions may be intentional or unintentional. We may not be aware of them, but it's a clear communication. You don't belong. You're not normal. So I'm going to, just give that, like, what if somebody, and I've had tradeswomen talk to me about this, what if the first day you come on the job, nobody even acknowledges you? Nobody even notices that you're there. The second day you come on the job, people do notice you're there, but you're only doing sweeping. The third day that you're on the job, somebody's really annoyed with you and says, well, you're just here because you're a quota. And if you continue to add up all of those incidents, they're probably not going to rise to the level where something legal can be done about it. But by the 15th day, how many of us would be done with that? How many of us would be like, no, you don't get to talk to me like this. I'm feeling stressed out now at work, at home. I'm not able to focus on what I need to learn. And all of a sudden, this does become a safety issue because when we're talking about this work in construction, we're not only talking about psychological safety and folks' emotional well-being, we are also very much talking about their physical safety. If I cannot focus on my job, I'm going to get somebody hurt. And it may not be today and it may not be tomorrow, but it is absolutely going to happen. And there's been some research done up in Canada through WorkSafe BC where they're continuing to study this. So they don't have a final study, but they're able to attribute, they think, more than half of all safety incidences that result in injury to some form of bullying, hazing, or harassment because a person has been distracted by the work. So that's one story, right? Those small moments. I also though want to talk about this discrimination and maybe implicit bias that's coming forward for folks where maybe you're a supervisor and you don't realize that you have a bias against a woman of color, for example, on the site. And so that means you don't spend the time that needs to be spent making sure that she's really well trained on the job. And I have a very specific example of this where someone was given a new piece of equipment and they got a 5-minute training on the piece of equipment because of implicit bias reasons. The white guy next to them, who looked like their supervisor, got 2 hours of training on this piece of equipment. And I imagine from you all, you can imagine, you can figure out where this went, but ultimately, luckily no one was hurt, but she ended up breaking something on the site for this new project because she hadn't been given adequate training. Not because she wasn't capable of doing the job, not because she didn't have the skills to do the job, but because of that person's implicit bias, their unintentional bias and more willingness to spend time with someone that looks like them. They damaged the job and could have potentially had someone get really physically hurt from not knowing how to use the equipment properly. And so when we're talking about creating culture change, it's also those things. It's also challenging the way that we have thought about who does and does not belong in construction so that we make sure that nobody's getting hurt on the job, that they're getting equitable access to training. So it's like this holistic thing. We not only have to change the small day-to-day behaviors that make somebody want to leave, but we also have to be working with folks to look at this, to start to analyze where they're coming from and start to change their own personal beliefs and behaviors so that folks actually have equitable access and so that we help make sure that, people aren't getting hurt both physically and psychologically.
Tiffany's example, the second example, is something that we see all the time. And when we finally get into a position where we're talking to that person who's the supervisor that Tiffany mentioned in a training session or in a meeting with leadership, what we often hear from that supervisor is, I want to be doing the right thing. I want to help. I care about the folks. But because they have this bias that they're not even really conscious of. And often later down the road, they'll share with us in a training or a conversation that oh, I'm nervous that I'm going to say or do the wrong thing. So then I don't even talk to the person. I don't even engage with them because I'm so nervous I'm not going to say it right, which is also harmful. Right? It's because in the example Tiffany shared, then that person is not getting the training. They're not being safe then on the job site. And then we're probably going to lose somebody who, could have been a skilled trades worker had they had the support and on the job training they needed. But because their supervisor was so worried about doing the wrong thing, they just avoided talking to them. We hear that a lot, and it's sad.
Yeah. And it's picked up in the report as well. I mean, you have almost 22% of the respondents reporting that they're rarely or never treated equally with men on work assignments. And about 20% reporting lack of equal treatment when it comes to on-the-job training. So it's really statistically measurable that this is a problem. And so I'm wondering, tell us a little bit about how we can solve that problem. What specifically within Rise Up helps address those issues of implicit and unconscious bias and gets people on the right track so that everybody is working safely and getting the training they need to be productive employees.
Maybe this is a chance that I can come back to those 6 steps that I mentioned really briefly. And so I think it's really important that when you're looking at doing this change work, there's not one thing that you can do that's going to solve it. It has to be comprehensive, and that's why I talk about this as a movement, and even though I'm stealing that word from you, but that's why we're talking about this as a movement or a campaign, or we talk about it through partnership. Because really, if you implement a training program, but the training program isn't backed up by your policies, and those aren't backed up by how you actually address the issue, and then there isn't a place where folks can actually talk to you about what's realistically going on, and then if you don't actually have goals and targets set, you're not going to be able to create the change that you want to make. And so that's why Rise Up has 6 steps that we work on with our partners. And again, we customize all of this because we want to be responsive to where you're at and where you want to be, So the first one is you've got to educate your leadership. And I think this is true in any industry, but especially true in construction, because workers are coming and going from sites all the time. And so if the leadership of a construction company is not bought into this work and is not investing in this work, nothing's really going to change, because the workers will be there for a short amount of time and then they will move on to another job site. So you really need some stuff coming from the top down. And that means getting training for the executive leadership about what their role is in this process. It means looking at those policies. What do the policies say? Cool, I'm really happy you have a sexual harassment policy in place. So what happens when somebody complains? What is your actual procedure? Who do they report to? How does the investigation happen? Getting to all of those questions, because a lot of times they've written a policy because they were scared and needed to have it, but don't know how to actually work with it. So it's working with us to assess those things. It's making sure that your leadership is trained, not only to overcome their own, barriers and issues and implicit bias, and those are some of the topics we talk with folks about, but they're also trained to even know, how do you respond to someone who's just told you XXX happened to me? How do you appropriately make it so that person's going to want to continue talking to you and not just start not telling you what's happening? And that leads me to the second piece. You have to actually listen to your people. And that does mean employee surveys, but it also means, are there ways for them to report that don't mean coming just to you? Are there other venues that they can talk to? Can they go to HR? Is there a third-party reporting hotline? Can they have an advocate with them? Folks are scared of reporting because in construction, they've been banned from job sites when they've tried to bring up an issue. And so it's going to take time and you authentically listening to people and then changing it and communicating those changes back before folks are really willing to come forward. And so then that leads me to the third step. Another avenue is forming a culture committee. And that doesn't just mean, woohoo, I formed a women's committee, you all are free to have the hours to meet or whatever. It means, does that committee have power within your organization to make significant recommendations for change and to have those implemented and then hold leadership accountable to those changes? So the culture committee means nothing if they just meet and have no influence. Then you also need to provide mentorship and leadership development. So of course I mean this in the normal way that we talk about mentorship and leadership. That means identifying those workers, being intentional about how you give them leadership skills, being intentional about creating mentorship opportunities, being intentional about supporting sort of those mentorships that come naturally. But it also means that leadership at companies should consider reverse mentorship, because it's probably been a minute if you're owning a company since you've been out on the site. Or if you're a white man leading a company, you probably have no idea what it's like to, actually I know you have no idea what it's like to be a woman of color out on the site. And so how can we create reverse mentorship where those folks who are in leadership are actually hearing from the folks in the field about what's happening out there, and they get guidance from people in the field about the actions they should be taking? We hit on the next step, which is training for all staff. So that's where we really do skill building. So yes, of course, we come in and we train and we define harassment, but we also help make sure that people know you do have the power to change your job site. You do have tools in your back pocket already that you can use to make a job site that you're willing to be on, that you want to stay on. That when you see something, I call it crossing your line, but when you get that feeling, that sensation in your stomach that you're not okay with something, you can do something about it, even if the supervisor's not going to. You have a role to play in that. And so we build those skills for folks so that when those moments come up, they don't panic and do nothing. We want to give them options. And then last but not least, and I sort of hit on this earlier, is measuring the results. As a company, you have to take a look at, where am I at now? Where do I want to be? And how do we get there realistically? So if you have 10% women on your job site, you cannot set a goal of, I'm going to be at 50% women in a year. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get discouraged and you're going to stop moving toward that goal because it's not achievable. And so what it means is us working with you to identify where you're at now through that evaluation, and then set what are the realistic goals for your company. How is the training program doing? What policies and procedures are you going to focus on this year and make sure everybody knows how they work? And then getting to all of those things, knowing that you're achieving those goals, and then coming back and telling the story. Because if you make the changes in a vacuum and you don't let anybody know that you're making those changes, that you want to improve as a company, they don't believe you're doing anything and they're still going to leave. And so you kind of have to have all 6 of those things happening at once to really do this huge shift that we're talking about.
And I would say, too, that in that model that Tiffany described, which is the core of the Rise Up program, it's not just on job sites, right? We're also talking to unions. We're talking to public owners. We're talking to registered apprenticeship programs. How can you take these same 6 steps and implement them? Because as part of our sort of, community of practice in the construction sector, each stakeholder has the opportunity to shift and change so that the change is happening industry-wide. And that's really critical too. And the last thing I would just add on shifting our industry is that, some of the work that we've done here in the Portland region through the Safe from Hate Alliance and the conversations that we've had, in terms of signing the pledge that has 4 pillars that support a diverse and inclusive workplace, but also address some of the pieces of the job site culture and the retention aspect with mentoring and leadership development. We also need to look at public policies at a higher level, right? And so we have public owners engaged in that conversation, but we also at this time and at this moment, which I know Tiffany and I are both really grateful for as other tradeswomen advocates across the country, are that we have leadership and a champion at the Women's Bureau right now with Director Wendy Chun-Hun, who, unbeknownst to us, was popping into a webinar that we did last year on National Women in Apprenticeship Day in November 2021. And after that webinar, in hearing from Portland advocates, Amy James Neal, who's leading efforts from the construction owner standpoint over at Portland Community College, was on that panel. Josh Durham, who was then at Hoffman-Skanska joint venture at the Port of Portland, was on that panel, and others. And she was so impressed by the very practical applications of the work we're doing in the Rise Up program. She's saying, how do we think about this in a bigger systems way to shift things for women and people of color today?
Yeah, I think, that's a really good point. These are all really good points you're making, Kelly, that no single person, no single employer can do this alone, because these are structural issues that pervade the entire construction industry. And so it really does take cooperation from the unions, from apprenticeship programs, from individual employers, and from individual tradespeople to do the things that are necessary to make the workplace more welcoming and safe for everybody who wants to make a career in this industry. So yeah, it sounds like a great model, and it seems to really pick up on and implement some of the things that are recommended in the report that we've been talking about, because, they identify some things toward the end of the report that tradeswomen do identify as things that help them in their career path, help them remain in the industry. So things like workplace policies, like anti-harassment policies, employers who are committed to diversity goals, project owners who are committed to making sure that the people and the companies that work on their job sites have real diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So it seems to fit sort of hand in glove with the recommendations that the experts are coming forward with to address some of these issues.
I was just going to say, part of what we're working to address, and one program and one person isn't going to change this, but we're up against systems of deep-rooted oppression, of sexism, of racism. Like, these are systemic challenges. These are deep and real across our industry and certainly across our society. And so it's one piece of the bigger puzzle of us coming together in our industry and our sector and as people to shift that. Right? These are very real things. And in Black History Month, my friend that I used to work with at Chicago Women in Trades reminds me Black History Month is not really just a month, especially if you're Black. It's every single damn day of the year. So, and Women's History Month in March, we need to be lifting up these issues and having candid conversations so that we can take action for change every day.
One of the other key findings of the report that I think we should talk about is childcare. more than 2/3 of the people who responded to the survey mentioned difficulties in finding childcare as an obstacle to a career in the trades. And interestingly, a lot of younger women and non-binary folks who responded to the survey who don't even have kids identified that as an obstacle in terms of seeing themselves with a future in the trades. And so that's something that's really important to talk about. And there's also a key finding in the report that almost as many people, about 63% of the people who responded, mentioned lack of pregnancy accommodations as a really big reason why they left the trade or why they're thinking about leaving the trade. And so I just want to open that up for conversation here about what can be done about that to address those problems so we keep more women in the trades.
And I just want to highlight that I feel like this issue around pregnancy and childcare is so important because it does keep people from staying and being in the trades. But I also think it relates to everything that we've already been talking about in our entire time together, because when you are not thinking about how do I make my workplace welcoming to everyone who is here, when you are not actually thinking about your own bias and your own ways that you build those policies that don't work for lots of different folks, you are still doing discrimination and having a lack of respect, and it may not rise to that legal level. But when I, as a worker, am trying to consider, is this someplace that I want to stay? Is this someplace where I'm going to be able to have the life that I want to have? When you're engaging in that kind of discrimination because you haven't figured those things out, people are still going to leave because of it, because they can't envision how they have a future there. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing more from you, Kelly, because I know, I mean, you were a single mom for quite a while when you were a trades worker. How did you swing that, and how do you see that? What do we need to change to support people who have children who want a career in this industry?
Yeah, Lauri, thanks for asking that. I mean, it's as Tiffany already noted, it's such a huge barrier, and not just in our industry. I mean, certainly with COVID, we saw the impacts of schools closing and daycare centers closing and all of that, creating such a hardship on so many families, not just tradeswomen, but also tradesmen. There are single dads who work in our industry too. So it is a huge challenge. We don't have, Oregon is third in highest costs for childcare across the whole country. There is not 24-hour daycare available. There are not early or late hours, and it's certainly not affordable or quality. So there's some good efforts underway here in Oregon with Labor's Community Service Agency, who's been working to ensure there's referrals and helping families that already have kindred care in place get support and training for their family members to have quality care. But it's there's so many more efforts that need to happen. If I could just point to, I mean, in my own experience working in the trades with two itty bitty people, it's frowned upon to keep your kids in the trunk of a car with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So I was very lucky that I had a lot of support from family who cared for my kids. But at one point I was working on a road crew, and in the Midwest where I was at the time, winters, you're laid off often. So in summers, if you work on a road crew, you're working 15 or 16 hours. So I didn't even see my kids. I dropped them off somewhere at 4 o'clock in the morning and came home and they were already asleep. So making sure that, as Tiffany said, that our industry is more welcoming for families, not just women, but families, right? So one of the things that has happened recently, IBEW Local 48 implemented a family leave, maternity leave policy to help support tradeswomen and trades workers. The Ironworkers International did that a couple of years ago. The North American Building Trades Unions is like endorsing that childcare needs to be close, accessible, affordable, and on site to large scale mega projects that are, multi-year projects so that workers can have a quality of life, take care of their families, and raise their families, and that our industry is not just doing the right thing, but also the legal thing. And maybe Nicolle can speak to some of those results and opportunities.
I'm really, really thrilled to hear about those programs that are happening because you're right. In the state of Oregon, over the last few years, and a lot of employers don't realize this, you are required as an employer to provide pregnancy disability accommodations, and pregnancy is considered a disability, and so you're required to accommodate it. And giving birth is considered a disability, and you're required to accommodate that. So. And so employers, you want to be compliant with the law. Of course, we always want to be compliant with the law, but you want to be aware that exists for a reason, precisely for all the things that we're talking about. Oregon State has recognized that, okay, we need to take care of our pregnant people and make sure that they can stay in their jobs and stay in our workforces. And not everything is perfect. The system's not totally supportive. You're right. There's a huge lack of childcare out there, and hopefully there will be some efforts that are being made to fix that. And in addition to that, there are some, of course, as we know, in Oregon State on the horizon, there will be some there's going to be state short-term disability here pretty soon, and pregnancy should be covered by that since it's considered a medical condition. So that's going to be a big relief as well, because that is also a barrier. If you're going to be, right now we're not required to pay for that in every circumstance, but like the programs that you mentioned, Kelly, are paying for it. And then because not being able to get paid during that time is also hard.
It's a huge hardship, and making sure that breastfeeding moms have a safe, clean, hygienic place to pump breast milk to feed their kids, right? And that's not in the porta potty, friends.
Like, I've had to pump in airport bathroom stalls, like in the in broom closets at the turn during golf tournaments. So I mean, yeah, it's really you can't overstate the importance of having a clean, sanitary, convenient location for women to be able to pump, just for them to be able to do their jobs. It really makes a big difference in terms of making women be able to show up for work and do their work productively if we're accommodating those kinds of needs.
And, having time and space for pumping or breastfeeding, is actually required on a federal level, not just Oregon State. And employers just don't know these things. They just don't know. It's amazing.
Yeah, I saw this great image that someone had of it. It was an illustration, but it was a tradeswoman on an I-beam, up in the air, breastfeeding her baby, which I don't recommend. I don't think it's OSHA safe, but it just was that image. Like I used to have it hanging in my office because it was like, this is what we need to be aspiring to, is that all workplaces and in this industry, because this is where we focus our work, like let's make it welcoming, accommodating to everyone. And it's not the argument that it's too much of a cost or we don't belong here. All of it's bunk. It's the 21st century. Let's get on the same page and let's make sure workers have dignity and economic equity. And then we can move on to other things.
It's a great point to help us wrap up our conversation today is, what we're really talking about is making workplaces that work for everybody. And, if you are treating everybody as though they are welcome to contribute to the workplace, it's just going to raise the bar for everybody, and everybody will have a much better experience on the job. They'll be able to focus on getting work done productively and safely. And that's what the work is all about. So I want to thank Kelly and Tiffany so much for being here today. This has been a great conversation. Nicolle and I are really grateful you were here. Those of you in the audience, thank you for spending time with us today. There will be more information about the things we've talked about today, including a link to the Future Worth Building report in the show notes. And there will also be information about Rise Up if you want to explore it as something that can be implemented in your workplace to help make it a more just, diverse, and equitable place for everyone to work. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.